Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Jane Gould, and I'm the rector of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church here in Lynn. And I'd like to welcome you to the RUACH show as we begin taping a new season. RUACH is the Hebrew word that means wind or breath or spirit of God. But it also is an acronym for our purpose in taping this show, which is religious understanding and community harmony. And so we're gathering this afternoon to talk about the business of balance. But we also sort of realize that our enemy in that is the busyness with which we and probably lots of you live. And so we're going to be talking about the busyness that gets in the way and how we might find the balance that is what the life of the Spirit invites us into. So I'm going to have my colleagues for today introduce themselves, and then we will set off for an hour-long romp. Andre.
Good afternoon. I'm Andre Bennett, Reverend Andre Bennett from Zion Baptist Church. And it's great to be back on set for yet another season. Let's see how we deal with the business of balance.
Yes. Hi, I'm Rabbi Margie Klein-Ronkin, and I work with the Essex County Community Organization, and I'm also the rabbi at Congregation R.U.A.C.H Shalom in Ashland.
So it is great to be back with you all. And I guess, I think sort of busyness in our lives and cultures is pretty much given. So I guess where I'd like to have us start is, what do your traditions say about busyness and balance? And then maybe we'll go into how our lives align with what our traditions might teach.
So I think for me, I am, as I would say in Jamaica, caught between a rock and a hard place, because my culture is different from my tradition here. My culture is one that requires you to always be working, always be on the move, always be thinking, always be innovative, always be going. And if you're not going, for some reason, you're not being productive, you're being lazy, you're being worthless. And that's a cultural thing. Whereas the tradition here that I've immersed myself into, there's a time of the year where everything gets quiet and everything gets, and one thing at a time is focused on, and all the attention is given to that one thing, and all the energy is given to that one thing. And for me, I go crazy. So I think for me, it's a struggle finding that balance where business and, now that I think about it, business are concerned.
Yeah, I don't feel like there's such a clear Jewish teaching, but what I think of is the story in the Torah, in the Old Testament, about God giving the Israelites manna, and God gives them a certain amount each day and a double portion on Friday so that they can have it for Shabbat. And at certain points, the Israelites are like, we need more, and that we miss having chicken and stuff like that. So quail rains down, and they have way too much, and it all goes bad. And there's this phrase, b'chol yom yomo, which means in each day should be just the right amount. And that's an idea that's carried in a lot of different ways when thinking in Judaism about moderation, that a hope is that each day you have just enough, and that actually requires a kind of faith that it's going to be enough, that if you put in a certain amount of effort, you don't have total control over the outcome, but you do what you can, and then you have faith that that's enough. And I think while that is an idea in the Jewish tradition, I would say that in the Jewish community, at least my experience, is that part of our sort of generational experience and trauma is of all these really hard things happening to our community periodically. And I think there could be a culture of like working really, really, really hard and trying to be perfect because we sort of don't trust that things are going to be okay. And so we're like, if we can just work incredibly hard and do everything we can, then maybe we'll be able to fend off some bad thing that's going to happen. And that is something that helps us be successful in certain ways and challenges us in other ways. And I think part of the role of Jewish spiritual practice is to be a counter to that instinct, which is also, consistent with lots of messages in America of go, 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 and just your value is how productive you are. And so, the message within the Jewish spiritual role, like in synagogue, that I would say is more slow down. We need to have Shabbat once a week. We have one day out of the week that we really don't do anything. And there are all kinds of rules of what you can't do that are sort of a protection around getting too busy. And for me, even though I do live a very full life, Shabbat has been this huge force in my life for balance and for taking at least one day when I'm not going to do anything else.
Yeah, and that is something working with you that I've noticed, like you really respect Shabbat. And I think for me as a Christian faith community leader, we talk about keeping holy the Sabbath day. But we've lost any sense of what that might mean. And it sort of devolves into the conversation of, why do they let sports teams practice on Sunday mornings, right? And as well, because lots in our community have other Sabbath days, and really you couldn't pick a day that would work when no one had it as a Sabbath, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? Yeah, like, and my community is like, but it doesn't mean keeping holy the Sabbath, it just, and so I do think those who remember Massachusetts and blue laws when you couldn't shop on Sundays, which meant lots of people didn't have to work on Sundays. Now they're having to work. A lot of members of my congregation work in hospitality industries, in service industries. So Sunday is not free to come to church. Right. And so I think we struggle with what Sabbath time means in the Christian community. And I think like one of the sort of iconic stories of the Gospels is the story of Mary and Martha. And they're sort of held up as these two sisters. And Martha gets super, super busy when Jesus and all of his friends drop in unannounced, making dinner and getting everything ready for everyone. And her sister goes and sits with all the men who are sitting at Jesus's feet, learning from him. And Mary goes and sits there and listens to the rabbi. And Martha, rather than going to her sister and going, hey girl, I need some help in the kitchen, she goes to Jesus and says, do you see what my sister's doing? Like, she's not helping me at all. You make her help me. Right. And Jesus's response is, Mary's chosen the better portion. And a lot of the tradition of the church holds that up as the contemplative is better than the active. And then you get folks like my mother who say, yeah, and he would have liked it a whole lot if no one had made dinner for him, right? Mm. And so for me, as I've particularly worked in communities of women, of how do women who do so much of the work in the church understand our message around busyness in the active life and contemplation, is that it's really, the better portion really is about being content and at peace with the choices you make. And that Martha's issue isn't really whether she's serving or not, or Mary's whether she's contemplating or not, but Mary is content with her choice. Mm. And Martha is disrupted in her spirit. She's not resentful. She can't even confront her sister directly. She's trying to call in the power. Like, it's like, you need to make peace with yourself, Martha dear. Like, if you want to serve and make dinner for us, great. if that's not okay, or if you need to ask someone to help you, find that space. And so I think for me, when I'm trying, like, whether it's, you know, with the congregation as a whole or with couples in pre-marriage counseling or something, to talk about how do you achieve balance, I really do think it's about being deeply grounded in who God would have us be.
Right.
And not one is good and one is bad of.
As you share that story, I think back when I just came here almost 10 years ago, it was the most mind-blowing thing for me when the pastor of the church that I served before I started serving at Zion would call me every fourth or third Saturday evening to say, well, you're going to be in charge tomorrow because I have to work Sunday. And I'm like, how do you work on a Sunday? Because my culture is one where whatever denomination you are, whatever the Sabbath is of that denomination, you do not go to secular work. You do not go to your job. You're focused on your worship. That's your worship day. That's your Sabbath day. And then I thought about it for a while. And I remember serving at the church I served in Jamaica, Power Faith Ministries International. And I was an usher. I directed the choir. I was the assistant superintendent for the Sunday school. I was an altar counselor. I was a youth minister. I was everything and then some. And Sundays were my busiest days ever because we had 3 services. We had morning service, midday service, and night service. And when I get to church Sunday morning at 6:30, sometimes I don't get home until 10:30 at night because I'm ushering in morning service, I'm singing in midday service, I'm having meetings in between, and then night service or something. And I'm thinking, well, am I really not working just the same? It's a Sabbath day. Am I resting? Am I really? Yes, I'm in church. Half the times I don't know what the message was. I don't know what happened because I am busy with someone at the back or doing this or doing that. And so when coming here and seeing how, you know, going to Zion and church ends an hour after you get in the door, it's like, what do I do with the rest of the day? Like, this is crazy. How does, you know, where do I go from here? What are you people doing? Jesus, don't you see what they're doing? Don't you see what they're doing? Like, they're ending service to go home and watch the game or relax. And then that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be in church. You're supposed to be working. But at the same time, work is work, whether it's inside the church house or it's at your secular job. You know, work is work. And, you know, whether it is that you're teaching Sunday school and serving lunches upstairs after service and cleaning up the church, there is still business in that. And where do you get the time, or where does the personal time for reflection and learning and sitting at Jesus' feet come in? And that was my struggle, and probably still is my struggle. But for a great number of the first 5 years of my being here, that was a struggle of mine.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on a couple of threads that so much of what you said I resonate with. But one thing in the Jewish community, or at least the observant Jewish community, Shabbat is protected. We could talk about a fence around the Torah, that it's not just you're following the laws of the Torah, but you create all these extra laws that make sure you're not even getting close. And so, you know, for me, it's like I don't spend money. I don't drive. I can't walk, you know, so I only get places by walking. I do personally, I will drive to a synagogue to pray, but other than that, I, you know, won't go anywhere. I don't light a fire, can't cook. So what that means is everything has to be planned beforehand.
Right.
And it means that everybody that's you can't be a Jew alone. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Both sort of theologically, because so much of how we understand God is through our connections with each other, but also, like, you need to have 10 people to pray. And so what it means is that Jewish communities live in close proximity to one another, largely so that on Shabbat we can eat together and we can go for walks together, because if you live too far away, you're isolated. And that's something that I love is just having enough boundaries, and that could be within the context of Judaism or however you want to set it up, enough boundaries that are not just your own boundaries, but are shared in your community, so that everybody is making choices within confines that are sort of forcing you to be together. And another thing I wanted to pick up on is that for me, by having that, it's not just about that I have this one day off and then I can rest a lot and then I can go back and be crazy. It's also that the one day off is supposed to remind me of who I am most deeply. There's a Jewish legend that when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, they had to work all the time. They couldn't observe Shabbat, but they had these secret scrolls that they would read every Shabbat that said, Shabbat exists, and the taskmasters would try and take the scrolls away because the idea of that people would have one day off a week and that they would have this time to pray to God was a radical and threatening idea to the enslavers, because the idea of Shabbat was an idea that like on one day you experience your freedom, and that reminds you that you're your own person and that whatever is happening during the rest of the week, that's not real, because the only person you're really accountable, or the only one you're really accountable to, is God. And I love that teaching because it's like, well, what is the point of Shabbat, or what is the point of Sabbath? Is that it's a liberatory space. It's a time that is a taste of the world that we want to create, that enlivens and inspires that vision, so that the rest of the week we can live it. And I remember when I was in seminary, I would just work my butt off. I would work so hard at school, then I ran this congregation, and then I would come and Jewish services are really long, so I'd come let's say they're 4 hours, so I would come 2 hours late. So I'd still be there for 2 hours, but one of my rabbis was always there, and he would say, Margie, you're coming really late to services. And I'd say, I know, I'm just so tired because I'm not getting enough sleep from working all the time. So, I just sort of need Shabbat. It's my time to sleep. And he said, Margie, you need to calibrate your life so that you can really have Shabbat. If you're so tired on Shabbat that you can't do Shabbat, then you don't have, then you don't have that balance.
Right, and that's, I think, because I think the same thing, Christian traditions around fasting, it's not about proving willpower, dieting, showing how holy you are. It is about focusing your attention on God, which is what you're describing with Shabbat, and really the Sabbath is fasting from work. And it's saying we need to mindfully create space in our lives to focus our attention on God. It's not just, your seminary image of, I can work so hard that I don't even notice I'm not working on Shabbat because I've done 8 days work in 6.
But here's a challenge of mine. I'm at church, or I take the day off, which I find myself doing a little bit more off, but my mind is going like crazy because I'm thinking about all the things that I could be doing with this time that I'm not doing, that I need to do tomorrow or whenever I resume duties. And then it's going to set me back because that day should have been for something. And so the mind is working at this point in time. The mind is going like 250 miles a minute because I'm taking a day.
Well, and also part of what you're describing is kind of the worst case scenario, because you're not getting done the things that you feel like you need to get done.
Right.
You're just spinning around, you're doing that mental list making, so you're distracting yourself from
the rest
engaging the freedom of the day you've taken for yourself.
Right.
But you also aren't letting yourself be free. You're still captive to the list and the necessity. And I think, and this is probably stating the obvious, but all of our electronic modes of staying connected and being accessible. When I was first ordained, and I am like literally decades older than you all, when I was first ordained,
but okay.
it's true, it's true. There weren't cell phones, right? So I could be reached on my home phone, or I could be reached on my church phone. There weren't personal computers. They couldn't shoot me an email or a 2-page treatise on what they think needed to be done about worship, or, you know, for the echo action, or whatever, like any of it. And there was a different pace. There really was a very different pace. And I talked to my sister, who is a litigator in a New York law firm, and she said, as soon as electronic transfer of documents started happening, she said, you used to have a motion that was due one day, and you knew you had at least 24 to 36 hours before a delivery person could bring the document back to you, because someone had to retype it. And she said by the time she retired from the practice of law, documents were instantaneous. Right. And so expectations of response were instantaneous. And I think sometimes in our faith communities, with members of the community or with our adjudicatories or whatever, like that we have this expectation of access and responsiveness that doesn't create balance. And you know, I can say, when I sit in a conversation with someone, I won't, like, my phone is away. And people say, don't you need to pay attention? And I'm like, no, I'm talking to you. But that is countercultural. Most folks are just checking to see, is this something to which I need to respond immediately? And my answer is, if I'm supposed to be talking to Margie or Andre, I'm going to be talking to Margie or Andre. I'm not going to be checking my phone unless when I came in and I said, I have someone who is in a little bit of a crisis, so I just need to check and see if they call me.
All right. But all of that, Jane, leads to the crisis that we're in right now, where because of the pace of things, the advancement of electronics and technology, the world seemed to be more chaotic. And from the chaos, the need for immediate response and immediate action now arise. How then does one deal with the gazillion demands that come in? Someone said to me some time ago, because I'm one of those who I'm always checking my phone. I'm in a conversation, I'm always checking my phone because something is always happening. And someone said to me once, not every message that you get is immediate. Not every message that you get deserves or should even be given an immediate response or attention. And I thought, well, yeah, that's true. But then immediately...
But how do I know which one?
Exactly. Immediately I got a message that needed an immediate response. And so it left me wondering, like, at what point, how do I know if my phone vibrates 7 times in 2 minutes? How do I know which one of the vibration which time I should pick it up and check it? And the thing about it is, how do I now balance, even if it requires an immediate response? Does an immediate response automatically equate to an immediate action? And how do I balance that? You know, and I feel like that's the crisis that not just us as faith and community leaders. You know, I serve a congregation, God loves Zion Baptist Church very much, but I serve a congregation that can be very, very demanding. I'm trying to choose my word carefully because I don't know who's saying, who's saying this. Can be very demanding. And what I've come to realize is that everybody believes, both church, work, friends, family, everybody believes that their situation should be your priority because it's their priority. It should be your priority, and you should attend to it immediately. And then, you find yourself like in a quandary.
I feel like this whole conversation about balance isn't even the right approach or the right terminology, because it's not like we have work and then life. Like in my life, I have my work, and then I come home and I have my 2-year-old who I love, but who's exhausting. And like that feels like work too. Sometimes I can't wait to go to work in the morning because I'm like, oh, I'll have some peace and quiet because someone's not like climbing on me. And so it just, that doesn't quite make sense to me. What makes sense more is, can we have lives that are filled with meaning and a sense of purpose and also with joy? And for me, what that means is doing work in the world, whether professional or not, that I feel called to do around social justice and building community. And it means being with my family and friends, because that's really important to me. And then also having experiences of joy, which could be, seeing a beautiful sunset, or just, making my daughter laugh, or wearing really comfortable pajamas, like whatever it is. And everyone will have their own list of things, but what I need to do is that same thing that, the Israelites thinking about the manna, that I have to just have enough in each day or each week or each month, that I want to cultivate a life where I have integrity in being in my purpose, and where I can experience joy of God's world. And where I get off of that is that sometimes I kind of start feeling important and like, oh, someone's asking me to do something, so I have to do it. And then I just start being more reactive. And instead of measuring things by, does this truly feel in my purpose, I'm measuring it by, how many things can I get done, and how many people's requests can I meet, and how can I be really impressive at meeting all of these requests. And that's not who I really want to be. But it's so much easier not to have to think about everything and to just go, go, go. But when we measure our lives based on how quickly we respond and how many tasks we can do, I think it's really easy to slide away from a deeper sense of being anchored in who we are and who we want to be.
Reverend Jones, the senior pastor at Zion, has one of his books is entitled Addicted to Hurry. And he wrote that book after he went through a series, a period of being burnt out. And I think he was hospitalized, and the whole
really burnt out.
Really burnt out, which is why he's now a master of resting and relaxing and finding peace in the storm. I pray to get there someday. But in the book, he speaks about being addicted to hurry. And as I listen to Margie, I'm thinking, like, even just having a conversation with my wife today, I don't know if I remember what really gives me, outside of my family, outside of being with my family, I don't know if I remember what gives me joy anymore. Because there's so much that's happening, and there's a need to assist, to make myself available. And I too have those conversations with myself where, I need to be in DC, and I need to be in Baltimore, and I need to be in North Carolina, and I'm important people. But I also have a little me, the one in the white on my shoulder that's like, you're also crazy. And people are going to find out that you're a crazy person if you don't stop for a minute. You know what I mean? And so I do stop. You do get to that place where, okay, you have to be realistic. I can do this, I can't do that. But at the same time, there is this yearning to try and meet all the demands, because it is just so chaotic and painful to just watch and listen to everything that is going on and everything that everybody's dealing with. And for me, I have Jamaica that calls, and the 50 states of America call, and everybody in Lynn call, and everybody has a story. Everybody has a need. Everybody is in tears and snot running, and you just want to hand out napkins, but there's not enough napkins in your hands to do that. And so it forces me to now assess: have I become addicted to being there for everyone to the point where I don't even know how to be there for myself anymore? You know what I mean? So, as you rightly said, Margie, every person's idea of joy or moments of joy is different. I think for me, I don't even know what those are anymore. I love spending time with my family, but now I'm getting to the point where I can't be bothered anymore, because the moment I'm with my family, Faye wants to hear about the trip to DC, and Shay wants to know when we're going to do this, and that has become now a demand of it in of itself. You know what I mean? So, is there a balance really?
Well, and one of the really interesting things that, and so often it is, for me, those I serve who kind of give me the moments of clarity, is when I was chaplain at MIT during January, when they didn't have classes, the students would preach. And I had this 19-year-old sort of nerdy, maybe goes without saying at MIT, mechanical engineering student who, January, a lot of the texts in the Christian lectionary are around discipleship. And so he's coming in and meeting with me, trying to work out his sermon and this, that, the other, and we're talking. And he's come back a few times because he's an MIT student, and they are committed to doing anything they do well, which would include preaching. And then he came in one day and he said, "I think I've got it." I was fascinated. "Okay, what have you figured out, Bob?" And he said, "Well, I always try to figure out, how big the studying piece should be, and how big the friends piece should be, and how much time I absolutely have to give to eating, and how much for exercise, and how much for church." And he goes, "But you know what I realized? It's not like figuring out if the church piece or the God piece is big enough. It's like God saying, I want that whole pie. It's all mine. And so you just need to figure it out, because all of it matters." And I looked at this 19-year-old and I thought, yeah, right? And so when I find myself getting caught up in the, sort of, I'm the only one who can do this mode, I think oop, all of me is the God piece.
Right.
And all of you, and you, and you, and you. Each person, each of us is all God needs. And all we can offer is what little bit we can.
Right.
And for sure, I alone am not going to transform the world. But if I get together with some others, we can do a little more. But if we run ourselves ragged, again, we can't be who God wants and needs us to be. Mm-hmm. And so it really is sort of pulling myself back to that place of saying, okay, what does the whole look like? Because, I know when my kids were little, I needed to get home, because they trusted that I'd be home if I could be. They believed that I wanted to be with them. So I needed that to be true, that I wouldn't just let everything else take over. And so, what not everyone who's listening to us knows, but you all know, my husband and I have made the decision, because both of our kids have moved to California, that we're going to, in the next chunk of time, relocate to California.
And I was invited to join.
I'm recruiting for California. This is true. But But it really is about where's balance and joy going to be? And I know I can't live 3,000 miles away from my 2 children and have my life feel in balance. And, and that's not the 24-hour or the 1-week balance. That's like the sort of core balance of how do I want to live and who am I and what gives value and meaning and purpose to life. And it's being close enough that I can be in the lives of my sons as they establish lives that their core families won't be my husband and me. So we need to be available to babysit or when that, if it happens, but it is such a different moment than John and I have ever been in before in terms of making a balanced choice.
And I think part of what you're saying speaks to the fact that it's not like we evaluate, these are the things that are meaningful, and these are the things that give me joy, done forever. Like it changes over and over and over again. And to me, actually, a key part of spiritual practice is getting to a place of greater clarity about what you need in order to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And that might mean different things in different religious contexts. So it might mean that you're praying till God is speaking to you and saying, do this. Or it might mean that, you're praying and then you just start feeling something. Or it might mean you're like writing in your journal about, what makes you feel good. But I think that, I just think back, I had some serious health issues after an injury this year, and the things that I used to be able to do to care for myself, I didn't have access to. Like, I couldn't go to the gym, or there were just a bunch of things I couldn't do. And part of me thought, well, now I have no access to comfort because I can't do the things I know to do. And what I feel like one of the things I learned through that difficult experience is that I'm capable of learning what I need over and over and over again. And that actually makes me feel more faithful, because I feel like, okay, I actually have within me the capacity to adjust and to figure things out. And another thing that someone said, actually, it was Joan Amaral, who is the Buddhist leader on the North Shore. He's the Mayo Zen Buddhist priest. She said that she had this realization after the election that, at least through her perception, the problems of the world were so great and she was so overwhelmed that she just felt really clearly that no matter how much she spent her time, and even if she spent 24 hours a day of all of her time, she still wasn't going to heal the brokenness of the world. Right. And that was very upsetting and depressing initially. But then she said she found it to be kind of freeing, because it was like, okay, well, if giving 24/7 is not going to be enough, well, then no amount is enough. So I can't just decide on how much I'm going to do based on the need, because
no one of us is enough.
And I get those moments ever so often. I think it was yesterday. I texted Margie and I said, "What?" Like, I was so angry. I'm driving to the hospital, and I'm thinking about the rescinding of DACA. And I texted Margie. I'm having this conversation in my head, and I'm like, I need to get to Margie right now. So I texted her, "What are we doing about DACA?" That was it. That was all I said. She said, "Well, we have whatever coming up." And I thought to myself, okay. So I sent her back a message like this whole, and there were some adjectives that were going through my head, but I'm like, this whole administration and just their modus operandi, it's driving me crazy. It's making me angry and angry by the day. And she said, "Me too." And that was the text. And I'm driving like literally 2 minutes in. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to worry about it. Like, I'm at the point where I'm going to pick and choose my battles, because today it's DACA, tomorrow it's going to be something else, and it's going to be something else, and it's going to be something else, and all the other things that we've been dealing with, those are, and even with my clients, because I work with kids kids and families that are affected by autism, and sometimes I'm on my way to the hospital because, you know, I have to commit a patient or something of that nature, and I get a text message or a call from another parent, and I'm trying to, in the middle of driving to the hospital to deal with one family, I'm trying to schedule how I'm going to deal with the other. And I'm like, I had that on Thursday last week. I'm like, you know what? Y'all figure it out. Just, I'm at the point where I'm starting to realize that there will never be enough of myself to
no matter
give
how organized you are. And I think that's part of learning. You know, I remember sort of having to learn again and again that no matter how efficient I am, no matter how well organized I am, there's always more brokenness. There's always more need. There's always more hope and possibility, right? There's always something else. And so finishing can't be the standard. It really has to be, like, I really do think that, am I living in, and whether balance is the right word, I actually like your notion of flow. Like, am I in a flow that I feel like I'm able to give the best that I have to give and know that life, that there is joy and wonder and abundance in life. Even if the world is just like a stunningly hard place to be. Because right now, the world is. I mean, you know, like, I read this morning, the Juan Gonzalez, one of our ECHO board members, writing about the training for collecting signatures for the Fight for 15, and talked about being a minimum wage worker as a Boston Globe delivery person and the impossibility of providing for his family in a reasonable way, working a minimum wage job. And I just thought, right, and what we do to folks, Juan and literally hundreds of thousands of others, is we say, well, so work harder. Get another job. Get 3 minimum wage jobs. And then maybe, and none of that is abundant life, right? Like, there's structural realities that we also have to contend with that simply mean that while we may have degrees of choice and we may get caught up in, I'm being invited to do this and speak there and go to this, there are other folks who are like, I'm working minimum wage, or I can't find a job, and I may have buckets of time, or elders who may feel like, my time, you know, what's busyness? There's no balance in my life because there's emptiness, right? There's lots of stuff that I think gets in the way of a flow that gives meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I think something that I wanted to pick up on one piece that you were saying, which I think is relevant to the last. I really like the last thing because I know that some of the people who have the time to be watching the show may not be the ones that are running around the most. There's a line in the Talmud, Rabbi Tarfon says, it's not up to you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it.
Right.
And what that means, as I understand it, is like whatever is your life's work, or the work of repairing the world, or the work of being there for family or friends or community, like, you're never going to finish it, so don't beat yourself up that you're not going to finish it. Don't be in crisis and be counterproductive by just lamenting that you can't finish it, but you're also not free to stop doing it because that's your work, and God wants you to be just doing that work. I work in the most joyful sense, and so, you know, I think that even for people that have a lot of time to sort of think about, like, what are the things that I can be doing that feel meaningful, and then what are the ways that I can be being that feel meaningful that are not the doing. And with what you were saying about you and John moving because you want to create those opportunities for joy, one of the things that I was thinking about, I was actually, before I was going to speak at the Zion anniversary celebration, I was having this realization about the music at Zion and how happy a lot of the music is. And I was thinking, like, I don't know how I can say a hopeful message. There was just this recent shooting and all these things are so terrible. And then I thought, you know, in the Black church, there is so much joy. And it's not that it's because anything has ever been easy. Like, somehow the joy came even at the same time as the struggle was happening. And I feel like there's so much to learn from that. Yeah. Of course, you could have joy in a sort of being in denial of reality kind of way, but I think that there's a different kind of joy that I've witnessed at Zion and at Bethel, where people are sort of gaining joy in being together through it all, or in the vision of what we know could be true. And it's not about denying that things are hard or saying we're not going to work on making them better, but it's like, we're God's people. If we're going to spend our entire lives and our entire energy just feeling miserable about how broken everything is, how are we emulating God looking at creation and saying, this is good? Right. You know, that's the response that I want to be able to have, is to say, this is good, this is very good, this is beautiful, Tov Ma'od, and be able to feel like celebration in that. And if I get so caught up in the brokenness, I'm not there anymore. And so it's a real question for me of, like, how can I have, and this I do mean balance, how can I have that balance between feeling the pain of the world and wanting to fix it, and also celebrating. E.B. White has this quote that says, each day I wake up torn between wanting to save the world and savor the world. It makes it hard to plan my day.
Right. I think, if I may touch on that just a little bit, I think one of the things, I grew up in the Black church. You couldn't tell, but I did. But I think what it is that I've experienced, even from my grandmother, and I was talking about her this morning because I miss her ever so much, especially when it gets to this time where things are just so overwhelming, and she just always have that joy. I think what it is, there is a genuine hope. There is a belief that there is a better life after this existence. There is a joy that we're going to experience after this, and that joy is defined by your religious group, your denomination, whatever it is. But there is, for the Black church, there's a genuine hope and belief that there's a better life that we're going to experience, and that's what you hear. That's a joy that you hear in the music. It's not so much that we're not affected by the work. But for me, I've never been so heavily involved in social justice work as I am now. And so now I'm literally torn between, all right, my hope is not in this world, my hope is in heaven, but I'm still living in this world and I'm seeing people suffering, I'm hearing people suffering. So while I have hope that I'm gonna experience that joy in the afterlife or the next life, there is so much suffering that I can't necessarily just dwell on the hope of that joy. I want to see joy or see people experiencing real physical joy here.
Well, and I think, and it is corporate, but it's also, I think, for some among those who may be watching, individual brokenness, whether it's of health or isolation. And so I just think that some of it really is saying, how can I, whatever weighs heavy upon me, How can I do what I can do and then find peace saying, so be it, right? This is, I can't not engage, but I also can't make all things right. And I think, like, there's a book I'm reading now of Desmond Tutu and Thich Nhat Hanh, a conversation about what's joy. And Desmond Tutu, Anglican bishop, you know, and really looking at, it's not sort of the pie in the sky when you die for Tutu. It's like, I have no idea how God will bring peace and joy in the world, but I believe in God. And in that trust in God's ability and God's presence, I find joy and I find peace, and I think he would say balance. We have talked our way to the end of our show. And so for those who have spoken, Pastor Andre, Rabbi Margie, thank you all. It's good to be with you. And for those who watch us over the month ahead, send us your feedback. Let us know what you like, what you don't. We are really grateful both to being given the chance to tape this show, but also to those of you who watch and work to make our community more and more the place we would have it be. So goodbye, God bless, and see you next month.